Chapter 1, Knowledge. I'm sorry. Who did you say is coming to fight me, you ask politely. A divine sorceress who steals magical artifacts, replies the city guard. Why would a divine sorceress steal a magical artifact? Why doesn't she just ask her god for one, you ask confused. She's afraid of something, of what I'm not quite sure. Word on the street says that she's delusional, explains the city guard. How did a woman like that become a divine sorceress, you ask judgmentally. Becoming a divine sorcerer or sorceress is actually pretty easy if you know how to assume a god form. I've personally never done it, a matter of fact most people don't, but it is a fairly common practice for mystics, elaborates the city guard. How do you know so much about magic, you question. I happen to have a few friends in other cities who are mystics. Why don't you know more about magic? You're the guard of the city's magic artifact museum, sneers the city guard. I just started working here like yesterday. I'm still learning the ropes, you reply as you stick your tongue out at the city guard. You stretch for a moment and then say, hey, how do you know that the sorceress is coming here and why don't you stop her yourself? The city guard laughs and says, my job is to protect the city and your job is to protect the museum. Don't think that just because you're new, that I'm going to do your work for you. Like I mentioned before, I have a few mystic friends who help to keep me in the know. The city guard gives you a rough pat on the back, as he laughs and waves goodbye. What a weird guy, you say under your breath. Chapter 2, Training. Later that day you head to the library to learn more about god forms. The city guard told you that assuming god forms was easy and that the delusional sorceress could do it, so you assume it won't be that hard. Besides, you don't have any magical abilities of your own, so if you don't do something then the sorceress will without a doubt kick your ass. If you don't find some way to deal with her before she attacks, then you'll likely get fired and have to move back in with your parents. You shudder at the thought. You walk into the library and notice a crooked-nosed librarian wearing a stereotypical wizard hat and bent glasses. The librarian looks up from her book and notices you staring at her deformed nose. The librarian frowns and says, hey, fuck you. You are thrown off guard by the librarian's brash remark and respond by saying, well, fuck you too. The librarian blushes and asks, is that an offer? Were you mesmerized by my stunning beauty? You give the librarian a dumbfounded expression and say, no, I was looking at your fucked up snout. The librarian slams her book on the back of your skull and screams, you little tease. You yell out, what did you do that for, you hag? You rub the bump on the back of your head. The librarian replies, men these days just can't express their true feelings to a woman of my caliber. I always told my mother that I was born in the wrong generation. You think to yourself, man, this woman is wild. Is everyone in this town so quirky? You bow your head and say, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have stared at your nose and cursed in your library. I can tell that we got off on the wrong foot. I am the new guard at the Magical Artifact Museum and I was wondering if you had any books on how to assume a god form. The librarian says, oh. You're the boy that the city guard was telling me about. Word travels fast in the city, you know. By the looks of you it seems like that sorceress is going to make you into roadkill. You try to keep your composure as you sarcastically say, thank you for your vote of confidence. The librarian smirks and says, look, you don't have time to read a book on assuming god forms. Let me teach you the technique myself. Before you can reply, the librarian interrupts and says, but only if you take me out on a date afterward. Your jaw drops as you say, what? A date? The librarian sighs and says, oh, never mind. I should have known you wouldn't be interested. No one wants to date a young woman with a nose shaped like a twig. It's okay, I'm used to being single. I just hoped I'd have a shot with the new guy in town. The librarian starts to tear up before loudly bawling. She starts to make a scene and people begin shaking their head at you disapprovingly. You panic and on impulse say, fine. I'll go out with you. You quickly cover your mouth with your hands and the librarian immediately stops crying. She smiles and says, well, it is settled then. Let's get you trained up. I can't let my boyfriend die during his first mission. You groan, boyfriend? Oh no. You and the librarian walk over to a nearby table. You drag your feet with a defeated expression on your face, while the librarian happily skips to her seat. The librarian shows you a book of sigils and teaches you about the gods that each sigil is associated with. She asks, so which of these gods would you like to assume as your god form? You reply, do I really have to pick an existing god? That seems so lame. She gives you a perplexed look and says, is this not what you wanted? I thought you wanted to assume the form of a god so that you could become a divine sorcerer. You say, I do, but I want my own god. I want a god who is just like me. She looks surprised for a moment as she thinks about what you just said. She sees the enthusiasm on your face and the twinkle in your eye. She gives you a warm smile and says, I think I know exactly what you're looking for. The librarian teaches you about how to turn your desires into sigils by removing all the vowels and repeated letters from your desire and forming the letters into a symbol that you meditate on. She explains these sigils are normally just used for creating personal spells, but you could make one to create your own god. You exclaim, really? The librarian nods and says yep. Then all you'd have to do is visualize yourself walking into your sigil and then boom. You gain the powers of your god. You gasp, wow. Why doesn't everyone do this? The librarian replies, well, for starters, most people aren't interested in the mystical arts. Even though magic is real, it is fairly easy for people to pretend like it doesn't exist. People are afraid of what they don't understand, and they tend to shun and isolate what they fear. Trust me, I know what it's like to be isolated. Most people don't treat me well due to my appearance. That's why I turn to magic and why I spend my time hiding from the world in this library. You hold the librarian's hand and kiss her on the cheek. She smiles at you and says, flattery will get you everywhere, darling. Now pay attention because this is really important. Gods normally have specific costs for assuming their form, which makes it risky to use their power. Your personal god won't have any weird costs, but because you're the only person who believes in your god, the form won't be very powerful. So don't think just because you have a god form that you'll suddenly be a match for the sorceress. Chapter 3, Revelation. Suddenly an alarm is heard coming from down the street. You and the librarian exclaim, the museum. You quickly bow and thank the librarian as you race out of the library toward the museum. Stupid, stupid, stupid. You should have known better than to leave your post to go train. You should have checked out a book on sigils, instead of leaving the museum undefended. That being said, you are glad that you met the librarian. You get used to her nose after a while, and she actually seems like a pretty cool person aside from her weird personality quirks. You realize that you're getting distracted thinking about the librarian and you rush over to the museum. When you arrive, you see a massive hole in the wall and the corpse of the city guard laying in the middle of the street. You fall to your knees in front of the guard, as tears well up in your eyes. You grab the city guard's lifeless hand and say, damn it, you idiot. You said you weren't going to do my job for me. You begin to cry profusely as you say, I'm so sorry. I should have been here. I should have. You are interrupted by a curvaceous, shadow-covered figure, floating out of the hole in the museum wall. The figure has large white eyes, a glittery pink aura and a magical artifact around her neck. The figure says, I'm sorry, am I interrupting your pity party? The figure laughs mockingly and spits on the corpse of the city guard. Your eyes widen in anger as you stare at the figure with a hatred you've never felt before. You yell, hey you bitch. I didn't know this guy very well. I don't know anyone in the city very well. But I know that he was a good person, and you don't disrespect good people. Certainly not people who died fighting for their city. The figure pauses for a moment before once again bursting forth with maniacal laughter. She screeches, you fool. Who do you think killed that pathetic sack of shit? You clench your fists and notice that the city guard's blood is on your hands. You take a blood-soaked finger and you begin to try and write out a sigil on the ground. Chapter 4, Pressure. The figure immediately realizes what you're doing and says, oh no. A mystic has come for me. I knew it. I told them I wasn't crazy. They're after me. They're all out to get me. The figure flies over to you and kicks you in the face. The impact causes blood to launch from your nose, ruining your sigil and knocking you onto your back with a hard thud. The figure grabs you by your shirt and flies low to the ground, dragging your body across the pavement at terrifying speeds. The friction rips away your shirt and peels away the flesh from your back. The figure then hurls you into the side of a moving car. You bounce off the car door and stumble into oncoming traffic. You are dazed, bleeding profusely, and terribly battered as you stare into the headlights of a speeding 18-wheeler. Chapter 5, Adaptation. Your adrenaline is going full throttle. Seconds feel like hours as you see the smiling faces of the librarian and the city guard in your mind's eye. You visualize yourself standing on a custom sigil, made from your desire to be with your friends. You are not alone in your sigil, however, as both the city guard and the librarian stand at your side. You hear the sound of two loud screeching sounds overlapping each other. As you visualize yourself closing your eyes, in the real world your eyes shoot open as the 18-wheeler stops inches away from your face. Floating in front of you is the spirit of the city guard, who in the nick of time let out a ghostly wail that spooked the truck driver and forced him to slam on the brakes. You stutter, but you're... The city guard says, we don't have time for that now. Look, you're a god now and gods have a natural connection to the afterlife. You say, what? But I shouldn't be powerful enough to summon ghosts. The city guard smirks and says, that's because you think no one believes in you, but that's where you're wrong. I didn't die because I didn't believe you could protect the museum. My dying wish was to help you, because I believe that you can do anything you put your mind to with a little help. Now go punch that bitch for me, will you? I can't do your job for you this time. The spirit of the city guard fades away and as you emerge from in front of the truck a blue, spectral aura of ectoplasm envelops your body. The figure tilts her head as she stares at you with a confused expression. You say, you know, a friend of mine hates staring. She'd clock you over the head for that. She's not here right now though, so it looks like I'm going to have to express deliver to you a second-hand ass whooping. Chapter 6, Who Will Win? The figure scoffs at you and says oh. She then laughs even harder than before. The figure's smile quickly fades as she dramatically says, and here I thought you were a serious threat. Ha! It looks like your god form is incomplete. No. No, it isn't incomplete. It's amateur. You really think you can defeat a true god with a makeshift imaginary friend? And people say that I'm delusional. The flying figure charges at you at incredible speeds, but you quickly bow out of the way of her attack. You then stand up straight in an instant as the figure flies directly above you, allowing you to headbutt her in the stomach. Your counter-attack knocks the wind out the figure and causes her to buckle as she crashes and skids across the ground. The figure gasps for air and says you can't win. You don't even possess half the power I do. You brush the dust off your tattered pants and say I didn't learn how to make my own god form to become as powerful as you. I just realized that I've been so rude, I haven't even introduced myself. I'm the guard of the museum and I wasn't hired because of my charm and good looks. I was hired because I know how to fight. Before the figure has a moment to react, you rush up to her and punch her so hard that a shockwave of air erupts from your fist and knocks her down the street. You race after her and repeatedly punch her further and further down the road. You yell, I just needed enough power to bolster my fighting ability so that I could surpass your shitty divine magic. I rely on my skill, my god, and my friends. You only caught me off guard earlier because I was upset, but now that I'm angry and charged up, you're going to regret stepping foot in my goddamn town. You grab her by her hair, rip the magical artifact off her neck, spit in her face and shove her face into the ground so hard that it cracks the pavement and knocks her unconscious. The next thing you know, you begin to stumble as your vision blurs. Your stinging back becomes unbearable and you realize that you're standing in a puddle of your own blood. You think to yourself, oh yeah, I forgot about that. You black out. When you wake up, you find the librarian sitting next to you in the hospital. She smirks with tear-filled eyes and says you're not getting out of our date that easily. You attend the city guard's funeral in a wheelchair and give a short speech about the short time you knew him. When you recover from your injuries, the mayor promotes you to become the new city guard. Years later, you and the librarian start a family together, and the prayers of the city empower you to protect them. The end.